Welcome, welcome, welcome to the 2022 Business Summit Harnessing Conflict today. We've got a lot on the roster this week for the Business Summit, a variety of live workshops via Zoom. We also have pre-recorded workshops, and we have networking tournaments happening every day. So welcome on behalf of your newly merged Peterborough and the Kawarthas Chamber of Commerce. We proudly partner with Peterborough and the Kawarthas Economic Development to bring you this business summit every year. So keep your eyes out. Take a moment to follow our sponsors on social media. We've got the Business Development Bank of Canada, BDC, is our summit sponsor, our profile sponsor, Nexicom, and of course, our knowledge sponsors, Microwave, Peterborough Whitby, and Lynn Woodcroft, Royal LePage Frank Real Estate. Thank you so much for joining us today for Harnessing Conflict with Ryan Smith of Savino Human Resources Partners. So first and foremost, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We are excited. You always have such insightful tips, things that we can carry through us, not just through conflict, but through relationships, kind of for eternity. You'll have tips and tricks on the other side of this workshop. So a little bit about Ryan. He's passionate about helping people reach their full potential. I have seen that time and time again. He helps leaders and their teams uncover innovative solutions to ensure they hit, achieve, and mark their goals. Ryan has been coaching leaders for several years, holds a bachelor's degree in business admin with honors, and is everything DISC certified trained. So he has extensive experience as a workshop facilitator, lucky us, and a public speaker as well. So keep an eye for him, follow on LinkedIn, check out his profile, give him some support. And whether it be coaching or workshops, Ryan's enthusiasm for investing in people quickly becomes evident to those he's working with, to those in the room today. So welcome, Ryan Smith. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to turn it right over to you to screen share and take us through harnessing some conflict.
All right, let's do it. Thank you, Tiffany. And yeah, it feels good. It's been a while since I've done a workshop for you guys. So it's good to be back in that space again. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And perhaps I should give a future thank you to anyone watching the recorded version as well, moving forward from here. So there you go, two birds, one stone. But as Tiffany said, my name's Ryan, and I'm the coaching associate and practice leader at Savino Human Resource Partners. So we offer HR consulting and services for small to medium-sized businesses. We also have a platform called HR Live, which is essentially like an online tool app, full dashboard that can really help automate and support a lot of your HR functions. And then in that space, I head up all of our leadership and performance coaching offerings and services. So whether that be workshops like I'm doing right now, online or in person, and one-on-one coaching. And as Tiffany said, I'm just absolutely passionate about helping people reach their full potential. And so whether that be offering fresh perspectives, helping leaders ask good questions, helping create plans and equip them with tools for their leadership needs, but also working with teams. I love to see cohesive teams come together and become more than the sum of their parts. Teamwork's one of the most competitive advantages an organization can have out there because one, it's so rare, but it is so powerful when we're able to make it happen. And so a lot of areas that I like to help train leaders and teams in is, of course, leadership skills, communication, change management, and of course, conflict resolution. Typically what we would call the soft skills that often have a much more tangible impact than we might realize. Case in point, studies have shown that up to 80% of all organizational issues and problems stem from strained employee relationships. That's a staggering number when I first heard it. Another stat for you is that the average manager spends around 25 to 40% of their time every week dealing with conflict. So what we typically call soft skills is actually having a very hard impact in terms of dollars and cents and your time spent. And also organizations that have good teamwork and know how to communicate well are just a lot more fun to work for and be on, and a lot more attractive in terms of keeping employees and attracting those rock star employees that you're looking for. And so I really love to help come alongside organizations and facilitate that side of the business. It helps strengthen relationships. And so, of course, that leads me to what I'm talking about today, which is harnessing productive conflict. So that let me segue here into my PowerPoint. So there we go. Perfect. Everyone can see that all right. So our topic today, as I said, is harnessing productive conflict. And so what I should mention first before I go any further, just to preface, is that this is not a conflict resolution workshop. It has a lot of overlapping principles with conflict resolution, but this actually goes a little deeper into helping us learn to identify and manage our responses in conflict. Because I can train you guys in a bunch of really good conflict resolution tools, but if we're not able to exercise self-control, emotional intelligence, and manage our responses, you won't be able to make use of all the good conflict resolution tools I teach you and show you. So often what happens is, leaders, you can learn a bunch of good stuff. You can consume all this great content, learn great conflict resolution tools and tips. But what happens is your responses are causing an uphill battle for you from the very beginning. And so the way we respond to conflict is often exacerbating it, escalating it, and making it worse, so that by the time you even remember to use those tools, it's often too late. And so when we learn to manage our responses well, that sometimes can resolve the conflict all in itself. And at the very least, it opens the door for that other party to be more open and bought in to coming up with a collaborative solution with you. So then you can start to make use of the tools. So today, what I want to do is give you some real practical tips to identify what are your personal conflict triggers, how do you learn to reframe your thoughts that you have during conflict, and what does that practically look like on an organizational level to start equipping your team, creating more of a system to manage conflict. Because really, productive conflict, it might sound like an oxymoron there to put those two words together, but when conflict is handled well, it can be one of the best things you have going for you on your team, because it's going to leverage the full diversity and skill sets and ideas of the people you have on your team. And what that means is no good ideas are being left on the table, and your team feels valued and heard. So even if someone didn't have their idea picked, they at least feel that you heard them out, that they were able to voice their opinions, and it builds trust because the team sees that, hey, we can go to the edge of hell and back and we'll be okay. No one's going to die. And we still have strong relationships in the team that can overcome that. So when conflict is handled the right way, it can be an amazing game changer for your productivity and the morale on your team. So that's what I want to look at. But it does seem like an oxymoron because most of us, we've never learned to handle conflict well. And most of us have had very unpleasant experiences with it. Case in point, what I want you to do right now is think of one word that comes to mind when you think of conflict. Go with your gut. Don't overthink it. And feel free to share something in the chat. What's one word that comes to mind when you think of conflict? And I got it open here. So arguing, yep, absolutely. Fight, yeah. What else we got here? Those are two good ones. Anxiety, yep. Disagreement, yeah. All those types of things, right? That's what comes to mind when we think of conflict. It's typically not good. Most employees have seen conflict negatively escalate in the workplace. Disengagement, silence, absolutely. And so when we talk about productive conflict, it's like, what? Like, what is that? Right? That sounds like what kind of foreign language is that? Productive conflict together, right? But really, like I said, when you learn to handle it the right way, it can build trust, because most of us on some level or another, we instinctively know this, because when you think about maybe some of your closest relationships, right? They're also probably the ones you've had the most conflict with. But because you've been able to handle it well, or not, but when you are able to handle it well, it increases the level of trust there. So that same kind of dynamic can happen in the workplace. But like I said, it starts with us learning to manage our responses. So before I go any further, what I want to do is give a quick snapshot of where the workplace is at, especially in a season where there has been an increased capacity for conflict. Recent studies in the middle of the pandemic have shown us that workplace conflict has increased despite remote working. So maybe that comes as a surprise to some of you. Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe some of you have experienced that, but it is a little counterintuitive, isn't it? because you would think with the rise of remote working that there'd be less conflict. I mean, there's less gossiping at the workplace to happen, right? Less water cooler talk. You don't have to be around the people you don't like. Let's be real. Not everyone you work with, you always enjoy working with, right? So you don't have to be around those people, right? So wouldn't factors like that decrease conflict? Well, that has definitely not been the case. One significant study showed that 55% of respondents indicated there is more conflict in the workplace currently than pre-pandemic. So I wanted to start off with that to help us understand that and realize that remote working, to some degree, it's probably here to stay. A lot of experts are suspecting that some of that hybrid is going to carry over. I don't know to what degree that's going to be. I think there will be some kind of return to physical workplaces, but also the remote option is always going to be there moving forward. What history shows us is that crisis is often an accelerator. So really, remote working is not a new thing because of the pandemic. That cultural trend was already happening. COVID just accelerated it. And now it's probably here to stay some level or another. So we need to realize that that creates an increased capacity for conflict. So this major study, it unpacked some types of conflict. And I should also mention here that the numbers and percentages will add up to more than 100% for all of you detail people watching. That's just because conflict is messy. And as we know, some conflicts that were reported in the studies would have multiple triggering issues that might have all been mixed together. So that just explains the numbers. So first was workload fairness was a type of conflict in the sense of some people feeling that they, obviously there's been a lack of resources happening right now. A lot of organizations looking to fill skill gaps, to fill open roles and positions, and some people have had to take on a lot more work. So there's been conflicts regarding that. Negativity leading to decrease in morale, just the attitude around the workplace, right? There's a lot of outside stressors going on with the pandemic and other stuff that are causing people to have a harder time regulating emotions in the workplace. It's normal, and there needs to be some level of empathy and leadership among that. People resistant to change, right? This is the biggest one. We know this one. Not just governmental changes, but policy changes now happening in the workplace to accommodate those and the dominoes that fall from there. All the different changes and administration procedures, SOPs that need to shift as a result. And so there's been a lot of people who don't like that level of change. People in general, we don't like change, but there's been such a capacity thrown at us, and the ambiguity has created a lot of stress and a lot of conflict. Now, some of the common causes, that last slide was how the conflict is expressed. Now, what is really going on when they interviewed candidates? They found that personality differences were a significant cause of conflict. And even more so than that, communication styles. And then the final big one was conflicting values. Now, I should mention that last one, that's a little harder to work with, not impossible, but those first two tell me that there's such an opportunity to fill emotional intelligence skill gaps. Is that when we take time to intentionally invest in our team, a lot of those issues with personality differences and communication styles, we can really move the tent pegs on those. Often human beings, we make the big mistake of assuming everyone is like us. So when we hear other people say things, when we look at their actions in the workplace, we see it through our own filter and our own priorities. And so, well, for example, me and Tiffany might have the same priorities of perhaps enthusiasm in our work and maybe organization. Maybe we would both agree that, yeah, those are important. If you were to look at our list in order, it would probably fall on different places of where enthusiasm should be versus organization. So that's the thing we often don't understand. And so we might see each other and we're like, that person's lazy or that person's rude, right? And we don't understand that, no, they value organization like you do. It's just for them, that might be priority number 5. And for you, it's number 1. And so it's important to invest in our emotional intelligence and communication skills so we can bridge that gap. And then often there's far less of a capacity for conflict when we know what to expect and when we can at least understand, even if we disagree. And that's what keeps it around healthy conflict, the type that revolves around ideas and concepts rather than interpersonal issues. That's the type of conflict that's good for your team. when we focus on what's best for the organization, in the spirit of doing excellent work, in the spirit of what is most productive and efficient for us, rather than the way they talk just irks me. And sometimes there's objective behaviors we might need to speak to, but you'd be amazed at how many leaders I work with and deal with that I talk to them. So like, what exactly happened when that person, what exactly did they say? And then the next thing that comes out of their mouth is, I think. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You think. So what I heard you do is assume their motives there, right? So and often we don't even realize we do that. And so part of the workshop today is helping us understand what's going on when that happens inside the brain. But perhaps the most disturbing stat, and the last one I'll leave you with before we move on, is with all the conflict going on, only 40% of people talk about it to their supervisor and 13% don't talk about it at all. So in your team, if they match anywhere near the averages, 1 in 10 people have a conflict that they're not talking about. And less than half of them are actually talking about it to their supervisor or the people they should be. The rest would probably be gossip or somewhere along that line. Now, some of the big reasons I've seen this happen in organizations is on a very core level, it's simply a lack of trust, and not competency-based trust. That's the one we like in organizations, where it's like, I trust you to do your job, or I trust you that you're good, right? You're knowledgeable, you got the skills to do your job. That's not the type of trust that helps build strong relationships on your team. Vulnerability-based trust is what helps with that, and that's the uncomfortable one. But that's where we all know we have each other's backs as a team, and I can admit to my coworkers that I have weaknesses or limitations without fear of reprisal. So I can, in a team, say, you know what, Tiffany, you take the lead on the speaking. I don't like that. I'm not good at that. And there won't be judgment, or there won't be. Now, of course, there's only so much wiggle room. Sometimes your supervisor might say, hey, I need you to do this. But often if we explore, we'd find there's a lot more room than we think for that type of stuff. But nonetheless, I'm okay with voicing it. And my supervisor's okay with hearing it. That sort of stuff. That's what builds trust. And because it allows us to bring in the human element and realize, okay, we all have different fears, different discomforts, different strengths, and different needs on the team. We can talk about that, and we're going to be better off for it. The second thing on a more practical level is having a communication and conflict resolution system in place. Most of us, we don't have an intentional one. Chances are, though, if you're experiencing consistent results somewhere in your organization, you do have a system, you just might not be aware of it. And sometimes those consistent results could be bad. They could not be working for you. So the idea is that, for example, with conflict, does your organization have a set out list of priorities or options for resolving conflict that your team knows about? So they know, well, you know what, if I can't resolve it with the party involved, I know exactly who I can go to in what order. Often organizations don't have that, or if they do, they told their employees about it once in a meeting and never revisited it. And so I've done workshops before where I asked them about that. One employee says, no, we don't got that. To which the leader says, what are you talking about? We talked about it at the meeting last year. Right? But if you're not repeating that on a regular basis, chances are your team's forgotten. Really, I'd say probably about a monthly basis for whatever your important values are or things that you want to reinforce. So the idea is, do you have options to help equip your team with resolving conflict, and do they know about them? So that's often what prevents people from talking about it, or from at least talking about it to the right people. So for our purposes, I think it's important that we define what conflict is, because sometimes it's very erratic, isn't it? And it's very up in the clouds, ambiguous, hard to really put your hands on it. What is conflict? For our purposes today, we would define it as a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. So remember that strong emotions part. It can, of course, contain productive and destructive behaviors. So there can be things that every unique individual will have different behaviors that are both productive and destructive in conflict. Some that might feel more at home, and others that might be a little more challenging to engage in, but it can be productive. And it can range from brief explosive disputes to subtle, long-lasting issues. So that's where it connects to the strong emotions piece, because those emotions don't have to be explicit, right? Of course, when we think of conflict, we think of like people at each other's throats, screaming, throwing stuff. But conflict can be very subtle. It can be gossip, it can be resentment and bitterness that we hold in, and then one day a loyal employee of 20 years just leaves and no one knows why. Right? That's the kind of conflict you really don't want, which we would call latent conflict. Most organizations that I deal with, they lie somewhere along the space of what I would call artificial harmony. And that's like, oh, we don't have any conflict. We're all good. Everybody loves each other, right? But those stats I just showed you would prove that that's definitely not the case. That a lot of organizations have latent conflict going on. Part of the issue too is that we don't know how to identify it when it is a conflict. So if you have a difference of opinion from someone else and you feel strongly about your opinion, you do in fact have a conflict, which will come out in one way or another. And so it's important that we can flag that and identify that, and know, what it looks like, the different ways it can express itself. So that right there is the definition for conflict that we need to think about moving forward. So if there's a couple things I can leave you with just to begin with, is that changing your behavior starts with changing your perspective. So we need to realize that conflict is inevitable and unavoidable. We can resolve it, learn really good ways to resolve it, but we'll never be able to eliminate it because people are different and people will be passionate about different topics. And so conflict is going to happen, but it can contain productive and destructive behaviors. So our job is to try and leverage the productive ones as much as we can. And so one of the things that we want to help you do, as I mentioned before at SHRP, is to build a communication and conflict management system so that you have policies and procedures that are enforcing your company values by design, that you've thought, okay, what do we value as an organization? Well, caring for people. Okay, well, what policies help support that, especially in how those people communicate and resolve conflict? So I'll talk specifically and practically at the end of the workshop here about some ideas of what that could look like. But a really good tool to start investing in your system is what I would call people reading or profiling. Now, I should mention, this is a really great tool, but it is a tool for dialogue, not diagnosis. It is not exhaustive in its scope. It's just to help you, like a compass, get the right direction where you can start to aim in some more productive behaviors with someone. So we're going to use everything DISC. I'll just give you a quick little intro of what that looks like. It's a personality assessment, great for assessing workplace behaviors. Once again, tool for dialogue, not diagnosis. There's so many other things that make up who a person is. But whenever you're dealing with employee, coworker, client, supplier, any kind of stakeholder in your organization, what you want to start with, and you want to identify, by the way, how to better meet them where they're at, you want to think of it as a scale. So we'll look at that vertical one first. And you'd ask yourself, this person I'm talking to, on a scale of fast-paced and outspoken to cautious and reflective, where would they lie? Now, of course, that person could engage in both types of behaviors at different points, right? Because they're fluid, they're dynamic. But if you had to pick one, which one do they engage in the most? What feels most natural, most at home for that person? Now, fast-paced and outspoken, those are people who are assertive, dynamic, enthusiastic, bold. They like a quick pace, sense of urgency in their work. Cautious and reflective, those are people who are more thoughtful, more pondering, introspective. They have good self-control over their emotions. So first, you're watching on that scale, where do they lie? And you're listening to words they say. You're watching their body language to try and identify that. When you have an answer to that question, the next, you're going to do a similar exercise on the horizontal here, which is on a scale of questioning and skeptical to accepting and warm, where would they lie? Questioning and skeptical, people who are naturally challenging, who like to question and challenge ideas. Accepting and warm, people who are naturally agreeable and encouraging and accommodating. Both are needed, both are important. Then Once you've answered both of those, this is how the breakdown goes for the 4 basic personality styles. We would have a D style or dominance. So someone who's fast-paced and outspoken and questioning and skeptical is going to be in that D range. Those are often people who would be the stereotypical natural leader. They're very results oriented. They have strong drive. They're sometimes perceived as being a little blunt or harsh, but they're very much a driver, let's get stuff done type of person. I style, fast-paced and outspoken and accepting and warm. Those are the energizers, the people who are, you know, you want planning your socials, the people who are good connectors, and Tiffany right away knows she is one. Absolutely. If you guys want a picture, you know. The I styles, though, they're the people who bring the enthusiasm into the room right there. Someone who's accepting and warm, but more cautious and reflective, that's an S style, which is steadiness. And by the way, I is influence, if I didn't say it yet. So steadiness, those people are the ones who are very relaxed, easygoing. They like protecting harmony in the workplace, incredibly loyal. They're usually the one, if someone's having a bad day, they'll go and comfort them. They're usually very reliable, and they're just the relational glue of teams almost. And then the final one is a C style. So that's questioning and skeptical, cautious and reflective. They are the analytical people. They are the good organizers, the planners, the people who go real in depth and get the research you want. They really value quality work and efficiency in their work, and they like predictability. So that is like the quick breakdown, so you can understand where someone is at. Okay, fast-paced and outspoken, cautious and reflective. Which one would I pick for them? Questioning and skeptical, accepting and warm. Which one would I pick for them? We use DISC as a really good backbone for a lot of programs that we do at SHRP. So if you did like a program with us, we would run you through an online assessment, you and your team, and it'd spit out a really nice 20-page report that has not just your DISC style, but how that connects to all your workplace behaviors. But for your purposes, if you're looking for something quick, you can often find free DISC assessments online if you just want to get a basic kind of snapshot quickly. But this is a great tool that you can use on your own. And when I've worked through it with clients, they very quickly can use it to identify their team with a high degree of success. So it'll really work for you. But how it connects to what we're going into next is conflict, of course. Every style will respond to conflict a little differently. Or at least it will have a tendency. So there's no right or wrong style. And actually, we're all a combination of all 4. But you'll have one that feels most at home. So I'm a C style. I can engage in all different styles, but what feels most natural to me is C style tendencies. So compared to most of the population, I would lean to that a little more. Same with Tiffany, where she would lean more to the I style, not that she can't engage in any of those other ones. It's just we all have one that feels most natural to us. So when we look at typical responses to conflict, a D style, 2 big motivations for them is going to be logic and victory. So one is we need to keep it rational. You know, it'll be difficult for a D style to bring feelings into it. It is that we need to talk about rational being objective, and victory. When in a bad place, it can become competitive, but when in a good place, what it means is the D style is I want to see what's the win at the end of this. I don't want to engage in conflict if I feel we won't accomplish anything from it. That's what the D style is looking for. It's like, help me see the win at the end here. Help me understand why we're having this conversation and how we're both better off for it. So if ever you have a conflict with a D style, remember that we need to communicate why we're talking about this and how it helps us both at the end be better off for it. I style, open expression and feelings, being understood. And it's like, hey, we don't necessarily need to have a practical solution. I just need you to understand how I feel. And 50% of the population, you'll see with the S style, they're like that too, is like that, where 50% of the other population would more be on the we need to accomplish something and results oriented. Both incredibly important. So I style, being understood, feeling like I've had time to talk and I need you to see how I see this. S style, feelings, right? They would match up with the I style in that sense, but consensus. For better or for worse, S styles like to protect the kumbaya circle. So it's like, is everyone okay? You know, do we all agree on this decision? Or sometimes it leads to the S style sacrificing their own needs for the sake of protecting consensus. Can be both productive and not at different times, right? And then the C style would line up with the D on the sense of logic. We need to keep this rational, but justice, it needs to be fair, right? That's what the C style is going to be thinking about. We need to have a fair outcome. Now, all of these major priorities here, as you can guess, can be both good and bad. It just depends on how we engage in them, because sometimes life's not fair, for example, right? And you can't always focus on fairness, or sometimes fairness can get in the way of people expressing their feelings, right? And then at the same time, sometimes feelings or consensus can't always happen, that we need to focus on a practical solution or advancing in an outcome, right? So it's all each style learning, what am I good at? And how do I meet other people better where they're at? So it's just a good self-awareness piece as well for you to understand, because all of a sudden, if someone does something and you feel really frustrated, you can ask yourself, oh, did they touch on my priorities? Did they step on them a little bit? Am I upset because I feel that they weren't logical, or am I upset because I feel that they wouldn't listen to my feelings, or that we're not having consensus? What is it? That can help you right away make better decisions to choose productive outcomes. Because if you realize that, oh, maybe they're not purposely trying to do this, we just speak different languages, and I need to help control myself so that we can see that and start to communicate that. So it's all about your responses. So whenever you're in a situation of conflict, typically what is happening is you have a conflict, you have what we'd call a triggering event that happens, something that makes you feel upset, threatened, angry. Then psychologists would call what happens next is an automatic thought. And this is typically a thought that we don't even know we're having. It's happening on a somewhat subconscious level. And it is usually what leads to a destructive response. And it's automatic, right? So we don't think to question it most of the time. Now, what's happening in the brain when this happens is whenever something happens that would make you feel upset or threatened, there's two pathways that are happening. The first one is called the short route. And as you can imagine, that one happens faster. That goes straight to your amygdala, which is the fight or flight response in your brain, which is what leads to a destructive response, because you feel something and it's immediately, I'm going to cave in, right? I'm going to cave in and surrender, or I'm going to fight. The long route is what we want to access, because that's what passes through our prefrontal cortex, which controls rational thought. So that's the part of your brain is like, this feels threatening. Is it actually threatening? But that's longer. So we often don't get to access that because we go with the short route, which completely skips the rational part of our brain. Sometimes that short route is valuable if it really is a life or death situation, because you need to act quickly. But most of the time in the workplace, it's not. And so the problem is, if we go with that, then we're missing the rational part of our brain. And often we won't pick a good response. That's where we lash out in anger at someone. Or, like I said, we cave in, even though our desires and needs might have been important. So typically, you want to train yourself to give yourself about 60 to 90 seconds with that long route. That's what's going to give your brain more time to start processing things rationally, so that you can eventually pick a more productive response. But the idea is we need to catch that automatic thought when it happens, learn to identify it, and then reframe it so that we can choose something better. So, chat time here for a second. What are some examples you can think of destructive conflict behaviors? Feel free to leave something in the chat. Silent treatment, yeah. Lashing out. Taking everything on yourself. Yeah, exactly. Can't say no. You just do it all yourself. Gossiping, yep. What else we got here? Let me hear one more. Trying to solve things, yeah, through passive aggressive actions. There we go. Those are all really good ones. And avoidance, yeah. So most of the time, if we've ever engaged in those, or they've happened to us, or we've seen someone else do them, I don't think I can think of a time where that brought a better result in the conflict. And typically what happens is psychologically, people mirror each other. So if you escalate things, someone's going to come up there to meet you because they feel threatened. They feel I have to protect myself. Same thing as if you withdraw, they feel threatened. So it's like, I'm going to withdraw too, which is why if we train ourselves to really, when someone else is escalating, if we stay and don't let ourselves get up there, eventually they'll come back down. It's a typical principle that happens and is a big thing that a lot of de-escalation courses will teach. Now, on the other side of things, how about productive behaviors? Let me hear some of those. Ooh, people taking a little more time to think on this one. Talking calmly, yeah. Taking a moment, yep, pausing before you respond. Discussing without judging, yeah, just open discussion. Taking time to think of it from their perspective, yes. Any others? Having frank conversations, yes, being candid. See, it's interesting, in the right context, for example, sometimes stepping away, yeah, put yourself in other shoes. Sometimes stepping away can be helpful. Sometimes it might not be, right? Sometimes being upfront and assertive can be helpful and productive. Sometimes it might not be, but it's some part of it is reading the context as well and how you deliver it. Bringing solutions to the table. Yeah, that, okay, once we've talked, it's like, let's, or not expecting the other person to do all the work, that you're actually bringing your own solutions to it. So that's really good. And most of you probably, if you can think of a personal example, when you did one of those behaviors, you'll see that mirroring principle that I was talking about. For example, when you were the first one to apologize, even though you really didn't want to, right? Chances are they apologize pretty quickly after that, unless it was a really bad situation, right? Or when you took it upon yourself to say, you know what, like I could do better in this, or here's what we can work on, then chances are they felt ready to jump back in with that as well. So understanding that kind of the different things that we have at our disposal and what we're aiming for is good. So how do we get there? What happens is when that automatic thought comes to you, the first step you want to do is to step back and then reframe it. When we talk about stepping back, the hardest part of doing that is that often as the conflict escalates, there are a million different thoughts going through your brain, and you're starting to feel emotions, and you don't always know at what point that becomes unhealthy, because automatic thoughts are natural. Feeling things, even if you're angry or upset, is natural. That doesn't necessarily make it unhealthy, but we need to be able to identify when it's getting unhealthy. There's lots of emotions you might feel, but studies have shown that all the emotions out there really trace back to two core ones. And that is either anger or anxiety. On a very base level, most emotions connect to those parts in the brain that are responsible for anger and anxiety. So first, being able to identify, am I afraid or anxious about something, or am I angry about something, can help you in how you step back. Now, how do we know, when something becomes unhealthy? It can be somewhat subjective. There are lots of different contexts and things we've learned culturally and everything that would determine that. But here's a few core baseline ones that will help you filter. First is, we might be stepping into unhealthy emotional territory if we find ourselves starting to dismiss others' opinions or perspectives, that someone's sharing an opinion and we just reactively respond to it right away, and we don't consider it or give it time to think maybe there's some merits here. If we become competitive or confrontational, where we realize that we're trying to win the argument, or we're trying to shut down their side of things just so we can end it, or when we realize our ego is getting in the way. Here's a big one too, focusing on personality over behavior. So that goes back to the example I shared a little earlier, that you want to focus on objective behaviors. What exactly did they say that upset me? What exactly happened? Not what I think they might mean, which ties into the next one, assuming others' motives. That's probably one of the biggest problems I've witnessed when dealing with this stuff, is that often someone does something and we assume we know what they meant by it. And that's often when we're not in a good emotional territory. It goes back to the example with leaders, that if I ask them what exactly happened, like 90% of the time, the first thing I hear is, well, I think. I think they did this or meant that, or or they'll tell me what happened, but not very confidently, and they're kind of using a lot of ambiguous language. And I'm like, well, is that what happened, right? Or what exactly was on that email that you were angry about? Like, what word for word? They might summarize what was said, but it's like I'm hearing your interpretation of it, which is important. We'll get to that, but I need to tell you what was. I need you to tell me what was exactly there, so that we can deal with this. But we want to, if ever we find ourselves assuming others' motives, that's when we're starting to get in territory where we need to step back. That's where, okay, the automatic thought is happening. We need to catch that before it goes any further. There's lots more, but the key things to remember with stepping back is those 4 points there can help you a lot. And is this rooted in anger or anxiety? That will help you. The next thing, once we've caught the thought, we've identified it, and we're starting to step back, then we're empowered to start reframing it. So the idea with reframing that thought is you want to challenge it. And there's 3 questions you can ask yourself that will help. 1, is this thought actually valid or true? 2, am I overreacting? Am I exaggerating? And is there another way to look at this? So when that thought happens and you're like, so-and-so wanted to make me look stupid in that meeting. Well, is that actually true? Do I know that as a fact? Probably not. Am I overreacting? Maybe that person cut me off and they were a little rude. But if I want to all of a sudden, beat them down with my words next, it's like, is that really the right response? Am I overreacting to that? Is there another way to look at this? Maybe they're really tired, had a bad day, and they don't even realize they're cutting me off. That sort of thing. So those are 3 really important questions that can help you in reframing that thought. And you always want to take that possibilities mindset to the table where you start to challenge it. And here's the kicker too. Even if you're right and that person is acting like a jerk, you believing that will rarely lead to your most productive response. Which is why I tell people that it's actually in your best interest to lean on the side of optimism in this. Because even if you're right and they were just being really rude or whatever, you're more likely to arrive at a productive response if you assume the best in them. And here's the thing, that's not letting them off the hook. That's for your benefit, right? Because really, like, conflict's escalating. It's like a car crash. It's like, does it really matter whose fault it was? Because you're still paying for it, right? At the end of the day, it's like, unless you can get some sort of lawsuit out of that, it's like, does it really matter? Because it's a car crash. It sucks for everyone. So the idea is like thinking about, okay, well, maybe I do know, they're like this. Maybe they've been like that a lot, but what will lead me to the best response for both of us in this situation, so that in the end, I'm better for it. And I don't need to go through as much of the headaches, and we can just have a better working relationship. So some examples of reframing could look like, she's never, ever going to like me again. So I screwed this up, but I can make this right again. I probably didn't handle that well, but we can work it out. And it's natural for people to disagree. That doesn't mean she's angry at me personally. So one more exercise from the chat. It's your turn now to try and reframe this. He's awful. What's a way you could reframe that if that thought popped into your head at a meeting? And you can just give me like, oh, you could use a hug. There you go. or an elbow bump in these times. What else do we think? He's awful. I might, oh, okay, I might be doing this wrong. Gotcha. What's another, that's not like him? Okay, being curious, right? That's not how that person normally acts. Any others? How can we challenge it using those 3 questions? Yeah, maybe he needs some assistance. Maybe he's just frustrated. Maybe he's out of his element a little bit. You know, or how about, hey, this situation is awful. It doesn't mean he's awful personally. Oh yeah, that's a good one too. Am I understanding what he's trying to say? Did I misinterpret what he said? What is his perspective that he got, got that reaction? That's a really good one. So, going off on that for a second here on a little tangent, one little small tool I often work with leaders a lot on is when they're in meetings, if they're dealing with conflict or if they're just trying to get better communication, less misunderstandings. Let's say you have to update someone on your team about a project that you're doing tomorrow. When you finish that, ask them, so what did you hear me say? Because one of the number one principles of communication is the message sent is rarely the one received. Is that they have different definitions. It's like a game of telephone, right? Broken telephone. It's like, how does it get so messed up over even like 2, 3, 4 people? It's because we all have different interpretations of certain words. And then we'll give our own interpretation definition of what we thought we heard. And each time you're only getting about 80 to 90%. And then that gap keeps growing, right? So the idea is that I want to understand, it's not really about what I said, it's how they interpreted what I said. Because often we put all the onus on the speaker. It's like, you got to communicate well and get this out well. And it's like, yes, but I also need to gauge what their understanding was, because sometimes no matter how well I communicate, they won't get all of it. So as the listener too, I can do that and say, hey, what I heard you say was, or to sum up what you said, did you mean this? So little paraphrasing questions like that can be very helpful to wrap up a meeting as a bookend to make sure that what you want to get across is coming across. That's really good. So I talked about building your system, right? We were going to go over this before we wrapped it up. So to sum this all up, we kind of went over what the state of conflict is, what productive conflict looks like, and how different personalities respond to it, and how we can start to step back and reframe when we get those automatic thoughts. On a larger scale organizational level, here's some tips or ideas to help up the ante on your team. The first is invest in their self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So that can look like some training like this. That can look like different tools you give them, personality assessments, communication tools, to help them have greater confidence in how they communicate and in how they deal with conflict. It could even be email writing courses. Because that is a huge cause of conflict, especially during the pandemic, is people misinterpreting emails. Because like you've probably heard, most communication is nonverbal. So that gap in understanding that I just talked about is even more in an email or a text, which is why I encourage people, even though it's inconvenient, let's just make a habit of calling our team more instead of sending the easy, quick email. Because there's often all kinds of miscommunication and conflict that's happening because of that. Equip them with communication and conflict resolution tools. So, there's the self-awareness and emotional intelligence piece, so they understand themselves. And then there's the practical habits that they can apply to each other when working together. And then, as I touched on at the beginning of the workshop, establish a clear set of communication and conflict resolution options in your organization. So that, for example, if I have a conflict with someone, I know that, okay, first step is I try to work it out with them. If I can't, I know exactly what the next step is and what's available to me. And then if we can't work it out there, I know what will happen next. And so people have greater confidence in dealing with conflict because they're not fearing that it'll just get left on the table and never dealt with. And they know what their supervisors are expecting them to do. Same with communication. So an example with for a communication system could look like, okay, in our organization, when we email, we're expecting a 24-hour response. If it's something more immediate, we text or whatever that looks like. And that's how we communicate, so that if someone sends me a text, then that's something I got to respond to quickly. Or if it's an email, I have freedom to get back to them within this time frame. And you don't have like 100 different communication channels where, Susie over there is using Facebook Messenger and Bob is using the memo board, and and then all this stuff is just this big spaghetti pile of communication styles, where you narrow it down and say, okay, we have 3 to 5 communication channels in our organization. If a message is sent any other way, we're not looking at that. And that just eliminates the possibility for conflict, and it makes it easier for people to deal with conflict because there's a structure in place that's a common foundation that they can speak to. So they can say, hey, like when you put that on the memo board, I know you wanted to get a hold of me, but that's not how we do business here, right? Did we not all agree to that and commit to that, right? So having a clear set of options, it doesn't even need to be this exhaustive list. It can be even 2 to 3 principles that guide your team's interactions. That can make all the difference. So one that I really love using with teams is, because often one of the hardest parts of conflict is just initiating the conversation. That's where most of the fear comes. It's like, I don't even know how to start. I don't even know how to start the conversation. Once they're in it, sometimes it's not as bad. So one tool I give organizations or teams is called just a BFC statement, BFC. And that stands for behavior, feelings, consequence. So if you have to confront someone about an issue that upset you or caused difficulty for you, behavior. Hey, so-and-so, yesterday when the printer wasn't filled up, feelings, I was frustrated, consequences, because I had to get a report out and it ended up being late because that wasn't filled up. So the real world consequences, how it impacted you. So it's a really great way. And when you talk about that with the BFC statement, you're trying to focus on yourself as much as possible. So it's not saying like, hey, you did all this and this and this and this, right? I'm just focusing on that one objective behavior. I'm talking about my feelings about it. I felt stressed. I felt frustrated because of what happened to me, right? Because of that. So I'm not coming in an accusatory way. And that will just help the conversation feel less threatening, and the person's less likely to get defensive about it. But overall, communication and conflict resolution options, and then are you helping your team become more self-aware, and are you giving them the tools they need? Those are 3 principles that can start helping you. And like I said, you don't need to throw the kitchen sink at your team. You can even implement just 2 to 3 very small but consistent policies that you actually hold people accountable to and that you communicate often. So with that said, it is question time. So I'll open things up to just any kind of questions. Oh, I saw another comment here, hard to resolve conflict via email. Absolutely. Most of the time, if you notice conflicts breaking out over email, I tell people, put that on the shelf, call them, right? Go to their office. And if for some reason that's not possible, really put some good thought into that email and over communicate. Make sure it's very clear what you're trying to say. But at this point, the floor is open for any kind of communication, conflict resolution questions, stuff we went over.
We had a question come in.
Yes.
What role do you think burnout plays in the recent increase of conflict in the workplace?
I would say a huge role. That burnout plays a very big role. Here's the interesting thing, though, that studies have shown about burnout, is it has far less to do with physical workload as it does about perceptions about the workload. It's the mental and cognitive activity that actually affects people's burnout far more. So for example, if I have a workout yay high up to my desk, it's overwhelming, right? Yes, like physically doing that work can be troublesome, but what is worse for burnout is my fear over what my manager will do if I don't get it done, and fear over letting my team down, and that constant anxiety that I can't turn off. And it's like death by a million paper cuts. It keeps chipping away at your brain for days at a time. That far more often is what leads to burnout. So what can help with leaders is understanding that principle, being empathetic, and clearly communicating that you have your team's back. And sometimes, because of the unique challenges, you might have to lessen your expectations a little bit in the season for the sake of your team. But you need to communicate to them that you have their back in that they are supported, that you're willing to be flexible wherever possible so that you can help reduce that anxiety and those fears. And they know that, once again, the trust piece, the vulnerability trust, I have your back.
Great answer.
If there's a conflict, see another question here, between two staff people, is it better for the leader to talk to each person individually, bring them together, or both? So sometimes it depends on the context of what's happening. The first step, though, that I encourage leaders to work towards is actually having an organization where the leader doesn't need to be a part of that, where the team is equipped and they know they're expected to try and handle their own conflicts. Because on some level or another, if, for example, if we care about our people, then how much care am I communicating to my coworker if I'm not willing to have a difficult conversation with them? And how much, there's not going to be any sustainable change if we just go to mom and dad all the time to fix it. So, for example, if I was working on a conflict resolution system, I'd equip the team with some good tools to help them have those talks, clearly communicate that they're expected to have those talks with each other. And then if they can't resolve it, the next step up is the manager. And then from there, it really is contextual whether the leader would bring them together. I would, at some point, bring them together probably. If it's really bad, I would take a first step of talking to them both individually and then bring them together. But as much as possible, I don't want to just leave it where I dealt with them each individually, because then they don't understand each other's perceptions of the issue. So yeah, to answer that question, I would bring them together at some point. If it's like a really bad conflict, I'd talk to them individually first, then bring them together. Great question. There's another one here. So do you find that teams work best when all personalities from the disc are present? Similarly, if there's too many of one type, are teams more likely to have conflict? So in a perfect world, it's good to have a good mix, because people complement each other's skill sets. And sometimes actually you are more likely to have conflict with someone who's like you, because it's more seen as competition. But sometimes, as we know, you got to make you work with what you got. So I encourage teams that if you know that you have like not a very diverse mix of different personalities, have that conversation amongst each other so that everyone understands this is what we're good at, but we have some significant gaps here that we need to work all together to fill. Where if it's all S styles, it's like, okay, we all get along well and are really easygoing, but where's the sense of urgency? Where's the drive, and how do we spur each other on to have those difficult conversations more? Or if it's all C's, it's like, are we getting stuck in analysis and so many details, right? and bogged down by all that we're not, once again, we're moving very slowly, or we're arguing with each other over the facts, right? So yes, sometimes it can be, you can be more likely to have conflict if you have a very narrow mix. But if you do, then experience is always a better indicator of job success. So simply have those conversations so that the team understands these are our natural tendencies. How do we work together to compensate for it? But it's great if you have a diverse mix of personalities, that then people can really complement each other. Some jobs, by nature of different personalities priorities, some jobs will be more attractive to a C style, right? Or to an S or an I style. So you might see certain jobs where it is all I styles because it's something very fun and fast paced and people focused, right? Where if it's a really analytical job, you might not see too many I styles or D styles there. So it's just, sometimes working with what you got that way. I see another one here. Do you have any tips for dealing with coworkers remotely? Yeah, it's so much easier to have miscommunications and not know each other's expectations. Yeah. So for tips, the one I mentioned is when you have emails, it feels sometimes frustrating. I get it, but you might need to over communicate in those emails, especially with tone. If you have to deal with something, I'm making sure I use language that communicates my tone. If I want them to realize it's uplifting, I'm not like angry at you, right? Then I'm trying to communicate as best I can so they get the emotion as well of what I'm trying to say. If it's an issue that I know could be misconstrued, I'm calling them almost every time. Like if it's something that's not raw facts, just based on, meeting time and place that you need to know, if I know there might be an emotional element there, like I need to call them out on something, I'm giving them a phone call, always on that. So, and then the other piece is wherever possible, whether it be together in meetings or individually, you want to touch base with people more often, and make sure you're hearing their concerns, that they're having, hearing your voice, or maybe you're all together on a regular Zoom call, where it's not about talking shop necessarily, or it's not about a big agenda list, but you can just touch base of, hey guys, this is just a meeting to quickly touch base, see how everyone's doing, right? Or see if there's any support you need, to get your roles done, that sort of thing, and communicate clearly that this is why we're having this meeting, so people understand. Any other questions we got here?
Excellent answers, Ryan.
Oh, thank you.
I wrote down a few notes myself. The behaving
Mhm.
feeling consequence. Sometimes I have a hard time kind of navigating those conversations. So I wrote those 3 words down. So hopefully the next time I need to do it, I've got it in order and I can move forward in the conversation. I also wrote down the 3 questions you put out to
Yes.
ask yourself when you're feeling frustrated. Is
Mhm.
this true? Am I overreacting? Is there a different way to look at this? I've definitely been in those shoes. So I wanted to write that down because I think the perspective on that, it's positive too. It kind of forces you to take a beat
Mhm.
and think before you make a decision or react. So really,
Exactly.
really,
And it's hard because leaders, we're confident people, and most of you watching, your drive got you to where you are. And so we don't always think to ask questions or challenge ourselves,
such a
you know,
great point.
because so it's like sometimes it's like relearning like new habits to stop and ponder more, to be more introspective, to think more, before you just respond to something.
I think too, with this pandemic, there's been like a lot of tunnel vision, right? So a lot of people are
Mhm.
kind of focused on the right here, right now, what needs to be done, and not thinking kind of down the line. But this sort of gives an extra tool to the kit to be able to kind of do that and give that support to your teammates.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Oh, we are grateful, Ryan. We are so grateful. We're recorded today's session, thankfully, because I'm definitely going to be
Mhm.
watching it back. There were lots of little pieces in here. And we're just so grateful for your time. If you want to reach out to Ryan, check in with Savino Human Resources Partners. You can connect with Ryan there. His contact information too is on
I have it
LinkedIn.
right there. There we
Oh,
go.
perfect. Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. We truly appreciate it. Once again, a big shout out today to our Business Summit sponsors, BDC, Nexicom, Microage Peterborough, Whitby, and Lynn Woodcroft, Royal LePage, Frank Real Estate. And of course, big shout out to our partners, Peterborough and the Kawarthas Economic Development. Please tag your chamber and your PKED on social media channels Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. at the Venture North building is Peterborough Networking. Come on out. I will be down there, coffee in hand at the Edison. So hopefully I'll see you there too. We also at 12 o'clock have our big panel discussion, a discussion for today's small business owner on finance. We have a finance panel set up, bunch of different panelists there. You can get your questions answered. Got lots of information coming down the line. Business Summit links are sent out every day. You'll get another email tomorrow, 6 a.m. If you know someone that should get this information, get them registered, pkchamber.ca. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Ryan Smith, you're genius. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll catch you at the next Business Summit meeting.